Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're logging in across the globe. We're very excited to have just a very brief conversation about the phenomenon of Christian nationalism in the United States, and we'll talk a little bit about its implications for our kind of global pursuit of dialogue and the embracing of democracy and and religiously pluralistic societies. So I wanted to make one comment before we begin. Funding to make this time together possible is part of our Study of the U.S. Institute's program on religious pluralism. This is a follow-on program, and we invited our 2022 cohort, and actually all SUSE alumni were invited to attend this morning. We've had several events after our summer together that we spent this summer with a core group of, I think it was 18 folks from this summer. And so with that, since we are a small group, I think it would be beneficial if we could just go briefly around the room and just to say hello, just to say three things. If you could say your name, where you're from, and if you were a SUSE participant, if you could specify student, scholar, and what year. So if we could start by going around the room, I'll start at the top. I'll call out, how about Majid?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Majid Al-Sai, I'm chair of the board of the Dialogue Institute.
And Sergio? You're muted, I think.
You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Great. William, why don't you go ahead while Sergio's coming on?
I'm William Cullinan. I'm in Refugio, Texas. I'm a board member, and I'm working to help establish ties with Africa and other places where there may be an interest.
We just concluded a conference on pluralism, dialogue, and democracy. We had a virtual conference this past Thursday. We'll be posting that to our YouTube channel. It's actually posted now, and we'll share that with folks later today. How about Kerry Olitsky?
Sure. I'm Kerry Olitsky. I live in central New Jersey, trained as a rabbi, an academician, practitioner. I was on faculty at Hebrew Union College in New York, and also led my own organization of outreach called the Jewish Outreach Institute.
And an author of children's books, wonderful children's books.
Author of children's books.
How about Nay?
Good evening, everyone. I am from Myanmar, and I was the 2015 alumni from YCV, studying about religious pluralism. And I'm happy to be here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl Olitsky from Central New Jersey. I'm the founder and the founding director of the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, and dedicate what I do to pursuing peace.
Thank you. Safa Natal.
Hi, I'm Safina, and I am from Indonesia. I was a student of 2019 cohort for SUSE program. So it's good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy.
Hi, my name is Andy. I'm the administrative and program director for the Dialogue Institute, and I am based out of Philadelphia.
And Simon.
Teacher fellow in 2017.
See you, Simon. Sergio, I think you logged back on, so go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. I'm Sergio Mazza, long-term board member of the Dialogue Institute, and I live in Colorado. And hi, Safina, nice to see you again, and Gassan as well.
Right, and finally, Hassan.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Gassan, originally from Lebanon. I'm the founder of the Global Forum for Religions and Humanity, and SUSE 2019 and 2010.
Double duty SUSE member there. All right, well, thank you all so much. We're going to get started in just a moment with, actually, we have a very important guest that just entered the waiting room here. And as she is coming in, I'll just remark about what we'll be doing today. We really have an intention to give a kind of a brief introduction to the theme of Christian nationalism in the United States and open up some possibility and conversation about what this could mean for larger Dialogue Institute programming, larger global conversations around the theme of religious nationalism. And at the end, I'll be making some commentary about some of our programs that directly tie around this theme. But at this point, I wanted to draw attention to the guest that just joined us. This is Dean Amelia Zankina. She's from Temple University's Office of Global Engagement. And I'm going to invite her to just to make a few remarks from her office based here at Temple University. But Dean Zankina, I wanted to just, we just went around for introductions, but I wanted to give you some orientation to some of the people that are around in this space so you can understand. Of course, our SUSE Study of the U.S. Institute's programs on religious pluralism have been taking place since the year 2010. We have more than 350 alumni from around the world, literally probably 60 different countries, probably a majority of them from the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. So we can see a number of folks that are here today representing Myanmar, Indonesia, and we also have a number of board members here and folks that are just interested in our organization. We expect a few other attendees will be joining us in a few moments. But Dean Zankina, would you, this will be recorded, and we'll be sharing this message with our larger alumni network, so they'll get to hear from you, Dean Zankina, about your role here at Temple University and how our university connects with the world. So without further ado, please.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and apologies for zooming in late. We had a Council of Deans meeting that went a little bit over time. It is my great pleasure to, first of all, to be able to listen to this discussion, as it is of great interest in my own personal research, but also to be able to greet you and tell you a little bit about what Temple is doing globally. I am very honored to have taken the role of our global engagement activities on July 1st this year, and to work on a strategy that would help us engage more in a more meaningful way. So what do we mean by global engagement? Global engagement, I view it as a holistic approach to education and to a worldview that starts on campus. So this is why events like this are so important. It is not about moving bodies across borders, bringing international students, sending students abroad, faculty, and so forth. Of course, this is an essential part. But more importantly, it means, what is it that we're teaching in the classroom? What kind of research do we engage with? How do we integrate international students? How do we prepare students who go to study abroad to be prepared for this cultural shock, and how do they then integrate this new experience into their overall academic and personal journey? So I think what the Institute is doing is incredibly important to foster discussions on topics that are very current and that transcend borders. So we're talking about Christian nationalism in the US today, but I can tell you that this applies to France, this applies to Italy, this applies to Serbia, this applies to Ukraine, this applies to Indonesia. So we want to start with the idea that it is our academic content that drives everything that we do, and our commitment to the outcomes that we want to see in the student learning, and to the intellectual environment that we want to create at the university and any of its campuses abroad. So starting with this, I think is the foundation to then decide what we want to do. So we are looking at ways to enhance and leverage our overseas campuses to help with brand awareness across the world of the The quality of Temple as an R1 institution, as an institution currently having foothold on 3 different continents, and one that not only houses international students, but it is extremely diverse, and it has ethnically an enormous richness among its faculty, its students, and its staff. So we want to engage those campuses in brand awareness. We want to use our presence across the world to promote faculty research, to promote exchanges with partner institutions in specific countries, in addition, of course, to having students move across borders. We have done a lot in the past year to integrate better our 3 campuses, and our students can flawlessly have a journey that takes them to 3 different locations in a 3-year or a 4-year degree. So we have developed the Global Cities program that allows students to start anywhere, Tokyo, Rome, or Philly, and go anywhere from there. We have developed first-year programs allowing students to start in Rome or in Tokyo, and then move and fill their degree in Philadelphia. And surprisingly, most of the students that benefit from those programs are not international students, it's American students. So this really positions our university differently and allows us to have a competitive edge in having this unique characteristic and advantage for students. So I'm very grateful for events like this and for all the effort that comes into it. I don't underestimate the logistical work behind it, not to mention the intellectual rigor that goes into it. So thank you so much for having me today, and I so much look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. And one thing that we, Andy and I and Sage, we always notice on social media is when we, connect with all of our friends and alumni around the world, they always list Temple University. I studied at Temple University, and they really, assert that with great pride. So the Temple's presence is, being talked about through our alumni around the world, and we're grateful for our partnership with Temple as well. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and screen share here. And we'll move into our conversation. Okay. Okay, so Christian nationalism in the US and its challenges to a diverse democracy. Just to give you some orientation, I mean, for some of us are from the US, some of us are not. I want to give you some little bit of an orientation about how this theme of Christian nationalism has become much more popular in recent years, and even in recent months, as a matter of fact. So this term of Christian nationalism has been increasingly embraced by popular political leaders. Here's one example, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. We've heard references to the term of Christian nationalism from gubernatorial candidates Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, and Carrie Lake in Arizona, and a Representative Lauren Boebert in Colorado. And here's a quote from Representative Greene from this past summer: "We need to be the party of nationalism, and I am a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists." Representative Boebert, another line from this past summer: "The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk." Some of you may be familiar with a research tool known as the Google Ngram. It's basically a tool where you can view media pieces and articles and public discourse to find out the popularity of certain terms that are used. So I entered the term Christian nationalism in this tool, and as you can see here, this term is not really referenced for much of U.S. history, but we can see a spike starting, gradual increase in the use of the term in the 1980s. But as you get to this is just a static image, so I can't show exactly year by year, but approximately around right here, 2016, 2017, you begin to see a dramatic increase. And this ends at the year 2019. But if we were to look at this term, I think there would be a much higher spike just in the last couple of years, and certainly even in the last few months. So we saw a rapid acceleration of the use of this term, primarily in the lead up to the Trump presidency and then during the Trump presidency. Looking at the January 6th insurrection, we can really see a number of signs of Christian nationalism. Now, I think many scholars early on, when we were just in the midst of January 6th, 2021, a lot of the scholars or a lot of the kind of media outlets didn't necessarily point attention to a lot of the religious imagery there. It was simply viewed as this was a stop the steal effort to discredit the results of the 2020 election, and really they focused on the kind of the political competition and all of the insurrection and all of that type of level. But a number of scholars have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years or so, specifically focusing on the role of religious images in this event. And I want to draw your attention to some of these images because it may not be obvious to a lot of Americans. This image over here on the left, some of you may recognize these are shofars, kind of a horn, a trumpet horn. And within Jewish communities, they're commonly used on Rosh Hashanah, as I understand it, as kind of a wake-up call for the new year, a call to become better, better selves, to engage in repentance and beginning the new year. So the shofar is certainly embraced within the Jewish community, but these individuals here are not Jewish. They are actually evangelical Christians. And for a number of evangelical Christians, the blowing of the shofar trumpet is a reference to a biblical text that has very particular meaning in this setting, especially at the Capitol insurrection. In the book of Joshua, there's an image of the blowing of the shofar prior to the Israelites taking over the city of Jericho. So there's this image of the Israelites circling, walking around the city, and then finally on the seventh day, the walls of the city miraculously collapse, and then the Israelite armies are able to go in to capture the city, to claim it for themselves, and of course, bringing death and destruction to the inhabitants of the city. And this is framed in that narrative as a call to action by God. Of course, biblical scholars know that this text is not really an historical text. It's more of a mythical nationalist narrative text in the biblical text. But for many evangelical Christians in this movement, it really is seen as having important symbolism for America today. So in the lead up of the January 6th insurrection, there were a number of what were deemed to be what were called Jericho marches, where leaders would go to state capitals across the United States. They would march around these Capitol buildings, blowing these horns. And there were a number of these folks present at the insurrection as well. So it's this kind of this indication of, this was of course part of the Stop the Steal rally, making a declaration that that the election results were not legitimate, and that true patriots ought to stand up and to call this out. Of course, you can see another image here of Jesus wearing a MAGA hat. Of course, this is an image, the famous portrait of Jesus. This was in churches that I was in growing up, and maybe if you've been a part of churches, you're very familiar with that image. Perhaps the most famous image of Jesus in the 20th century America. Of course, a white image of Jesus, which would not be historically accurate. And of course, there's the MAGA hat. So a sense of of Jesus being a true supporter of this movement to make America great again. Some of the other images that we saw at the January insurrection, we can see here a statue of the Virgin Mary, to recognize that this is not exclusively an evangelical Christian kind of a way of viewing the world. There were Catholics certainly viewed this as specifically a civic religious event. You can also see the image of the cross here, that image of bearing the burden of the cross, kind of willingness to sacrifice oneself for this greater cause of God, doing the right thing, this kind of martyrdom kind of a narrative. And then finally, there's an image which I think you all have seen of the image of the gallows. And during the insurrection, there were cries from the crowd that said, "Hang Mike Pence." Of course, Mike Pence was our vice president, and he had this very important ceremonial role of facilitating the approval of the electoral votes which certified the 2020 election results. And there were, President Trump, of course, calling on Mike Pence to, quote, "do the right thing" and not certify the results, and folks in the crowd that day calling for his execution. And you can notice, if you take a look at some of the graffiti on the gallows, you can see the language of "in God we trust." So clearly there is a kind of a religious framework to the Stop the Steal movement. And all these images come from a website called Uncivil Religion. It's a group of scholars that collected these images and made them available. And I can make these links available to you after I can send an email to the whole group of participants. So signs of Christian nationalism. So let's just look a little bit at what folks are defining, how scholars are defining what Christian nationalism is. And this is a term, this is the helpful summary by Professor Anthea Butler. She teaches at the University of Pennsylvania. Simply put, it is the belief that America's founding is based on Christian principles. White Protestant Christianity is the operational religion of the land, and that Christianity should be the foundation of how the nation develops its laws, principles, and policies. And she goes on to talk about how Christian nationalism has emerged as a type of a unifying narrative about America. So America, number one, America as a divinely appointed nation by God that is distinctly Christian. America's founders, rather than wanting to disestablish religion as a unifier for the nation, were in fact establishing a nation based on Christian principles with white men as their leaders. Number three, others, Native Americans, enslaved Africans, and immigrants would accept and cede to this dominant narrative of America as a Christian nation and accept their leadership. Number four, America has a special place not only in world history, but in biblical scripture, especially concerning the return of Christ. And then lastly, that there is no separation between church and state. So this is just kind of a helpful, there is a lot of scholarly conversation about this right now, and a lot of different ways of looking at it and framing it. But I think Anthea Butler's is just kind of a helpful, kind of a thumbnail sketch to give us a little bit of an entree into some of the most common and pervasive themes that entail Christian nationalism. I want to draw your attention to a very recent book that has come out. There's a book by Stephen Wolfe. He actually wrote a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism. This book was released just a little bit over a month ago, November 1st, 2022, and it has already gone to really the top, was one of the best sellers on Amazon, one of the top 500 books that are being sold right now. And here are some of the really, I would say, disturbing messages that are a part of this book. here are some of the top ideas that he puts forward. First of all, he makes this very basic argument that it is fundamentally natural for human beings to prefer people in their own ethnic and racial group. So he's saying that even before the fall of Adam and Eve, before sin entered the world, so to speak, in the Christian worldview, it's still, even in the Edenic state, it would be perfectly natural for groupings of people to be by themselves, to be within their own group, to have preference for blood and ethnic relations. And I'll go to this third point here, that nations, in his mind, can only cohere around blood relations, and that ethnicity ties to soil is really the core essence of what it means to be a democracy. And I didn't include this term in the text here, but I wanted to bring it out to you. He uses the term Volkgeist, which is the notion of this kind of like a spirit of the people, so to speak. And when we put all these kind of terms together, it's kind of a disturbing linkage here. We have the sense of the true nation coheres only around blood relations, a particular ethnicity tied to the soil, and it's not a nation that can be unified around abstract ideals of democracy. In fact, if you read his readings very closely, you can see a lot of language where he is actually in opposition to democracy. And his preference is that there would be a Christian society that would be ruled by a Christian prince, or somebody who is has this ultimate authority to represent the true people and to represent the true religion of the nation. Now, it's tempting to view these types of assertions as kind of fringe and at the margins. And I think, like, if we would have seen a book like this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would clearly have been written off as an extreme right-wing, marginal type of belief. But the reality is that we're seeing these types of books become embraced by a number of readers, and a number of even by it's the National Conservative Movement, I think, endorsed this as one of their key books to read. And a number of observers, including Brad Onishi in his review in Religion Dispatches, referred to this book as a kind of a systematic theology for Christian nationalism. So he suggests that this book is a book to watch, because over time, these ideas could become more institutionalized in a lot of church settings, where this could become part of like a training and a basic form of spreading this type of a doctrine throughout the community. Now, this notion of Christian nationalism, I gave you, these images that talk about the sense of, oh, well, it's a very much a recent upsurge. People are talking about it all of a sudden. But there have been a number of people that have been upholding this notion of a Christian nationalist identity and the vision of a Christian nation for a very, very long time. And this goes back for me, back to my college years and my high school years. I remember David Barton. I grew up in an evangelical Christian background. I went to an evangelical Christian college, and I was exposed to early on the teachings of David Barton and his Wall Builders organization. And I remember distinctly this video and a book that went with it called America's Godly Heritage. Now, his basic argument in this book was to push back on kind of mainstream scholarly assertions that the founding figures of America were, influenced by deism, influenced by larger kind of notions of liberal democracy and that kind of a thing. And he made the argument that all of the founders were distinctly evangelical Christians, even Thomas Jefferson. Of course, we know that that's a bit of a problem. That's really quite a stretch to be making there. David Barton actually wrote a book about, I don't know, it was about maybe 8 or 10 years ago called The Jefferson Lies, which he tried to make a whole case that Jefferson was not the deist person who was committed to a diverse pluralistic society, but kind of revised and cherry-picked a number of quotes and basically said that Jefferson truly imagined that there should not be a separation of church and state, and it should be a society that embraces evangelical Christianity as the official religion of the land. That book itself was actually pulled by the publisher, a Christian publisher, because the scholarship was so bad and so ill-informed that it had to be taken out because it was seen as not credible by a lot of publishers. But of course, it's really important to emphasize that just because something may not be historically verified, just because something may not be scientifically verified, that does not negate the power of a really good story. So that is the kind of the fundamental power of this kind of Christian nationalist narrative, as Anthea Butler suggested it. It's a very strong, compelling story that says America was founded by Christians, founded for Christians, and we are a nation with a destiny to move forward. We're a nation that was founded out of innocence, and we have this pure origins and pure beginnings. And ever since then, there has been a decline. In historical terms, we call these declensionist narratives, where there's this constant call to go back and reclaim America's true virtuous origins. And you can see that kind of a reference to that phrase of "Make America Great Again." It's really subtly a nod to this notion of going back to this original era where America was founded by these true patriots, these true virtuous founders. And of course, whitewashing the narrative of this history of course, forgetting about the role of slavery, we're forgetting about genocide against Native Americans, and this whole type of a thing. But nonetheless, this call for a mythic narrative of the US as a Christian nation has been a very, very powerful, compelling force. And I would argue that it's become even much more powerful. And like I've said, Barton's been writing about this since the 1980s. This was a core part of my church education upbringing and many other evangelical Christians throughout the US. But it wasn't as popular on a larger level. I think it has become more popular as as many Christians are feeling the sense of America's demographics are changing. The Robert Jones wrote a book recently, it was published in 2016. The title was "The End of White Christian America." And he's a sociologist, and he began to point out a number of the factors of how white Christians are no longer going to have demographic majority. And I think that the publishing of his book was very timely because that was around the same time as the rise of the embracing of these kind of Christian nationalist narratives, in part fueled by an anxiety that somehow white Christians would not have that demographic majority and would, as a consequence, potentially lose their cultural power, their social power be degraded, and most importantly, their democratic power. If their voting power was in decline, if their numbers were going smaller, there would be less of a chance that their candidates would be elected to political office. So you could kind of start to see the seeds planted in this notion of, if we can't win elections by participation in the democratic process in the typical normal way, there begins to be a bit of an erosion of faith in the democratic process itself, and hence this kind of questioning of the results of elections. So many of the scholars that I've been reading about and watching over the last years have really made that link of this deep connection between Christian nationalism ideology and the decline in the embracing of democratic processes. So how widely are these ideas about Christian nationalism? A couple of stats here. 31% of Americans believe that God intended America to be a land for European Christians. Another quote here, 15% of Americans believe that taking up arms to defend their politics that is legitimate. 30% of Republicans believe this, but here is very interesting. 43% of Americans who hold the notion that America is for white Christians believe that violence is justified. So these are some really high numbers. And I could share some other stats with you, but I don't want to bombard you with numbers. There's a number of sociologists have done some definitions around, what are the folks who really embrace Christian nationalism. The difficulty is there are different nuanced understandings of what Americans mean by the term Christian nationalism. There can be the more of the extremist versions of, we want atheism to be banned in the United States. We want abortion to be banned in every possible circumstance across the nation. There may be more nuanced versions of Christian nationalism that will simply say along the line of, we want Christian values to influence public life. And, at a certain level, me as a more of a progressive Christian, I would embrace certain Christian values that I would like to see that would influence public policies as well. So there is kind of like a range. So I'm not going to bombard you with a ton of statistics about what the rates of Christian nationalism are, but nonetheless, just to give you a summary, it is a deep part of American public life right now. So here's a couple of books that I would share with you that I think have been getting a lot of conversation. This book on the left, Taking Back America for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. These are two sociologists who give a lot of the kind of the sociological framework for, or give us a sense of like how widely Christian nationalism is embraced. And they have kind of a 5-point test that they use in their surveys to determine what level of Christian nationalism that they are at. And I can share some of that with you. I'll actually be reviewing one of these books for the Journal of Ecumenical Studies, and I'll be happy to share some of the results with you in the future. A couple of other books that are really interesting as well. Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. This is a forthcoming book that is coming out within the next month or so. The book on the right, The Power Worshippers, Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism in the US, really looking at how this framework of Christian nationalism has been deployed by political operatives to consolidate power in the US. And there's an interesting podcast as well that really digs deeply into Christian nationalism, how it's been a part of American cultural life for decades. And I encourage you to take a look at that as well. But I want to spend a little bit of time with this, which I think is really interesting. There are a number of academic critiques of Christian nationalism. There are a number of critiques that come from political leaders who say Christian nationalism is a threat to diverse democracies. It's a threat to pluralistic society. But I think that we ought to give some attention to specifically religious voices, and in this instance, Christian voices who have risen up to stand against Christian nationalism in the US. And I want to draw your attention to Amanda Tyler. She gave testimony before Congress yesterday And I think she can summarize a lot better than me, making a really compelling assessment of what Christian nationalism is and how she sees it as a threat to American life and also to Christian life. So can somebody just give me a thumbs up if you can hear this? Can you hear the video?
It's a bit quiet, Dave.
Okay. Is it too quiet or are you able to hear
It is. It's pretty quiet and it's a bit choppy as well.
It's a bit choppy?
Yeah.
Okay. I might just go back to her website then and just share something off of her website that I think is pretty powerful. So anyway, I can share that link with you as well if you wanted to go. This was before this congressional testimony yesterday. Representative Jamie Raskin, you probably recognize his face there. I encourage you to listen to the video. I found it to be very, very compelling. But let me just, in lieu of that, let me just give you a little bit of a summary from her website about how she talks about Christian nationalism. As Christians, our faith teaches us that everyone is created in God's image and commands us to love one another. As Americans, we value our system of government and the good that can be accomplished in our constitutional democracy. Today, we are concerned about a persistent threat to both our religious communities and our democracy, Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism seeks to merge Christian and American identities, distorting both the Christian faith and America's constitutional democracy. Christian nationalism demands Christianity be privileged by the state and implies that to be a good American, one must be a Christian. It often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation. We reject this damaging political ideology, and we invite our Christian brothers and sisters to join us in opposing this threat to our faith and to our nation. As Christians bound to Christ, not by citizenship, but by faith, we believe the following. We believe that all people of all faiths and none have a right and responsibility to engage constructively in the public square. Number two, patriotism does not require us to minimize our religious convictions. Three, one's religious affiliation or lack thereof should be irrelevant to one's standing in the civic community. Government should not prefer one religion over another or religion over non-religion. Next, religious instruction is best left to our houses of worship, other religious institutions, and families, meaning it's not the role of the government to teach religion. Next, America's historic commitment to religious pluralism enables faith communities to live in civic harmony with one another without sacrificing our theological convictions. Next, conflating religious authority with political authority is idolatrous and often leads to oppression of minority and other marginalized groups, as well as the spiritual impoverishment of the nation. We must speak and stand out against Christian nationalism, especially when it inspires acts of violence and intimidation, including vandalism, bomb threats, arson, hate crimes, and attacks on houses of worship against religious communities at home and abroad. And of course, we can think of the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue, the Sikh Gurdwara in Wisconsin, the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, among other religious minority sites that have been attacked in recent years. Whether we worship at a church, a mosque, a synagogue, or temple in America, America has no second-class faiths. All are equal under the U.S. Constitution. As Christians, we must speak in one voice, condemning Christian nationalism as a distortion of the gospel of Jesus and a threat to American democracy. So in conclusion, before we go to some conversation and dialogue around this, just to recap some of what we do here at the Dialogue Institute. Since 2010, all of you have been a part of Dialogue Institute for many, many years. You've seen some evolution in the names of the program. Sometimes it's been called the Study of the U.S. Institutes on Religious Pluralism in the United States. Sometimes it's been referred to as the Study of Religious Freedom in the United States. And depending on who is in political office at the time, there's been an emphasis on one or the other. We have just received a renewal of a grant for the next 3 years, and the title that the State Department has given for the institutes coming up this summer and the next 3 summers actually is the Study of the U.S. Institutes on Religious Diversity and Democracy. So really putting that democracy term at the forefront of this program. So we continue to engage in these programs that emphasize the theme. And many of you who are here have been through those programs and been thinking about the role of religious pluralism and diversity in your own countries. And we'll turn to you in just a moment. I wanted to bring one last attention to something that I think is really important as among our programs is our religious diversity history tours. As you all know, Philadelphia is the place where Americans talk about the beginnings of our nation, where America began, the birthplace of America. So in these deeply symbolically significant locations, people will debate about what is the meaning of America, what is the meaning of the beginnings, and what do our foundations and our origins say about who we are today and what it means to be an American today. And, if David Barton were giving a history tour of Old City, he would probably emphasize a very limited scope of Christian presence in the early colonial period. And he would probably just emphasize certain evangelical Christian leaders who talked about the freedom from tyranny of the established church back in England, and they came here to practice their faith freely, and then they could establish their own Christian morality in this new colony of Pennsylvania. So we even saw candidate Doug Mastriano talked about William Penn, and really the way that he talked about William Penn was this very kind of a narrow notion of him founding this kind of Christian city, this Christian colony. But if you take a tour with us at the Dialogue Institute, and if you attend our SUSE programs and we walk the streets of Old City, Philadelphia, you will see an image of our early founding period as much more robustly diverse. We will stop by Mikveh Israel's synagogue, and we will talk about the important role that they played in the constitutional debates around religious oaths. And because of Jewish arguments and other arguments, we do not have a religious test for holding public office. So Philadelphia's Jews played a role in creating that space for religious diversity. We know that Muslims got off slave ships in the Philadelphia harbor. We know that there were free thinkers and other deists who were part of these early conversations about this diverse society. So telling those early stories of diversity and the ways that citizens were able to navigate difference, to use dialogue, and to be able to find common ground, to establish public institutions like the first public university, University of Pennsylvania, the first public hospital, Pennsylvania Hospital, creating these civic institutions where people from different faiths, different perspectives were able to work together to find enough common ground to work through their differences to advance civic good and civic life in our city. So we think at the Dialogue Institute that when we give these history tours, we're reframing this narrative, making this founding narrative a little bit more hospitable and spacious to the broad array of Americans who share our public life today. So Christian nationalism, my view, is just far too narrow. It's dangerous to democracy. And as you saw Amanda making her case with the Baptists, many Christians view it as a threat to the soul of our Christian faith. It's not in the spirit of who Jesus is. It's not in the spirit of what it means to be a faithful disciple of Christ in the world. So those are just some initial thoughts, and I will stop screen share at this moment, and we have a few minutes. Welcome questions to clarify, thoughts that you might have, suggestions for things that you might be inspired to do or to work together on around this topic. So thank you all very much.
If you're looking for comments, I've given this issue a lot of thought. It strikes me that religious nationalism is widespread around the world, as Dean Zankina mentioned. It's not a US only phenomenon. It's also not a new phenomenon in history, or even in the US. I think a great cultural example of this is the movie Gangs of New York. It's a great fictional representation of American nativism, which is another way to talk about the same thing. And it has a long history in the US. I was emailing with a friend back and forth this morning on the subject, and he said, white Italians such as myself were not considered white, even 50 years ago. Even when I first immigrated to this country, it was very difficult for me. Not so much later when I came back for college. What I do think, or what I see as new, is that religious nationalism has moved from a fringe social phenomenon to a significant social and political movement. That's really what's different and scary. And I think it's also the willingness to accept a misrepresentation of the writings and actions of the founding fathers to justify that Christian nationalism. And what surprises me is the political success of this movement in many parts of the US, and the willingness to undermine the basic democratic and constitutional frameworks that we used to take for granted. And I think that's really the danger. And that's really what's new and different.
Well said. Dean Zankina.
Thank you. I would like to relate what you presented to some research on white supremacism, for example, by scholars like Michael Kimmel, who found similarly a lot of women involved in that. So it's interesting that you started your presentation with quotes by women, congresswomen, female congresswomen, and this is fascinating because usually radical right movements, nationalist movements are by definition men's movements. Kasmude, for example, calls them in German non-Parteien, meaning that such parties get male voters, male representatives, and male leaders. But of course, there's a lot of exceptions to that. Marine Le Pen being the most obvious example. But I found this very, very interesting that it is in fact not a male phenomenon. That there's a lot of involvement by women, and it is mostly this racial, cultural, religious phenomenon merging together. So just as a comment, but a wonderful presentation and fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. There are really some excellent books that I was searching through my notes to find the name. There was a scholar that I met at a conference recently who talked about the role of women in this movement. And there's a lot of if you listen to a lot of the folks who are advocating for Christian nationalism, they'll talk a lot about the anxiety about, perhaps some of you have heard this notion of replacement theory, that we're being replaced by, that white Americans are being replaced by immigrants and that type of thing. So there are many leaders who are saying, like, we've got to encourage family life, we've got to oppose abortion because this is a threat to the reproduction of white Americans. So the role of family life is really a core part of Christian nationalist thinking as well. So let's go to Hassan, please. You're muted.
Thank you, David, for this amazing speech, actually. I was reading this book, The Faith of Donald J. Trump. I don't know if, well, and this triggered actually a question that I would like to ask. Do you think, like, with what Mrs. Dean said, Dean Amelia, about the right-wing race in all over the world, not only in France, but everywhere. Do you think this was the title in America, like Christian nationalism, was the actual like fuel of this movement in America, using this as a title, or it was there, but it required someone to step in and take it, which was the 45th president of the United States. So do you think, was it like under, like as fire under coal, and then it got reignited, or it was like just established by the 45th president? What do you think?
So you're, Hassan, you were asking about the US in particular, or were you asking Dean Zankina about Europe and so forth?
Yes, so because it's a trend all over the world. Like
Sure.
The right wing is a trend. You can't but see what's happening in Italy, in France, in everywhere. Like for the first time in history, Marine Le Pen wins the first round in the French elections, and she was on the verge of, like, before the French bourgeoisie stepped in and said, "Hey, we cannot be ruled by the right wings." So, well, in Italy now they're taking over. It's everywhere. You know, even in Russia, President Putin is considered to be a right wing, you know. So that's a trend all over the world. But I specifically in the United States, was it a matter of time before this was getting up, you know, floating, or it was just simply, you know, the right moment for the 45th president?
Yeah, I think in the US, I mean, as far as like how social movements work, I think there's always this notion of like, oh, it's Donald Trump, it's focusing on the person, it's his fault, he's the one that did that. But to do that is really misreading the kind of the social context from which social leaders emerge. They always emerge, you know, Max Weber did a lot of writing about the charismatic leader really only gains their power from the movement from which they grew out of. So I would say those coals were there, and recent demographic trends have really sparked more of the embrace, and Trump was just able to capitalize on the language in a certain way that resonated with people. The prophet only is able to speak what the masses are wanting to be said. So the focus should not be so much on the figurehead, but the movement that fuels it below. How about Safina next?
Okay, so thank you for the presentation, and I want to ask about, is there anyone who come from other religion who maybe they give their opinion or they speak about Christian nationalism? Like, I just want to hear about that one. And is there any books that written by I'm sorry, written by anyone who come from other religion in the US? Like, can you mention them, please?
You were asking about books about analyzing this in the United States.
Like, yeah, but written by maybe people from other religions. Like, I mean, like, they're not Christian, and people who give their opinion about this one, but they are not Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, Majid, you're correct. Majid, why don't you mention that book? Go ahead.
Safina, there's this book, and I guess the type is backwards, but The Politics of Vulnerability by Esma Dean, a Muslim leader who wrote about the threat to religious freedom and minorities in America. So there are a number of books, but that's the first one that was on my books on my desk. So that's one.
Okay, thank you.
I would also point out Simran Singh, who's a Sikh leader in the US. He wrote a very powerful book. He's the executive director of the Religion and Society program at the Aspen Institute. He's amazing. Ibu Patel is the director of Interfaith America, and we'll share these with you in case you're not able to write them down. He's an Ismaili Muslim leader who writes a lot about Christian nationalism as well.
Okay, thank you for the book recommendations. And then how about the people who give their opinion about this phenomenon? I mean, like for the Christian nationalism from any other religion's perspective. Is there anyone who give their opinion?
Well, I think a lot of these folks are saying, like, Ibu Patel is saying, like, America is for me as well. Like, I ought to have a space within this community. And, Simran Singh does a similar thing of like, he grew up as a Sikh individual in Texas around very conservative Christian folks. And he, talked about, the importance of finding his own identity, his own place. So I think there's a lot of minority perspectives that are speaking up. How about we go to Majid next, and then we'll go to Nay.
Thank you, Dave. And I wanted to respond to Dr. Ghassan's comment and question about the rise of right-wing nationalism worldwide. Kind of what I've seen is we have lived in the last 50 years or so in a time of dramatic change, social change, economic change, technology. We've seen more changes in the life of humanity in the last 50 years, probably than any time or the time up until that point. And rapid change makes people in general, makes human beings, I think, very uncomfortable for the most part. And as these changes occurred, some individuals will reach back to that which is more familiar, more comfortable, and be susceptible to leaders who pour gasoline on that fire of fear and anxiety about change. So the way I read this is that there's been a lot of discomfort with the rapid change in our lives, and also economic dislocation. Obviously, there's been high unemployment in Europe, in the U.S. There's been in Asia. There's been dislocations, and in part because of technology. When all of those things are happening at the same time, people want to reach back to a past that they envision as a much better time, when they had better economic times, less change. So I just wanted to offer that to Dr. Ghassan.
Let's go for just a few more minutes. We'll go to 11:40 or so, if that's okay. Nay, can we take your comment, please?
Yes. Yeah, maybe there might be some language barrier and maybe some connection because I'm having unstable connection. But however, I want to appreciate your wisdom and courage on explaining this topic, because as I understand, like the Christian nationalism has the experience of misinterpretation back in the old days. But however, I think this is realistic, because on the world we have a lot of people, and a lot of people, we individual people have different views. And if we do not have like these a set group of religion, it will be really hard for the leaders to control or to move forward for the developments. And when there is an interpretation of the Christian nationalism or religious nationalism, it helps the world to manage more conveniently. But however, it wants some of the direction goes to sometimes wrong and sometimes right. But however, I got that now these days you are trying to embrace Christian nationalism in a much harmonious way. And I want to know, like, what is your thoughts on religion participation on politics? Because I think this is a huge issue in most of the countries, in our country as well. And as I understand, like Christian nationalism is a kind of participation on politics. So yeah, I want to hear your comments.
It's a really good question, and I don't think that those of us coming from a Christian perspective, when I go to the voting booth and when I make my voting choices, I'm choosing candidates that I believe will, support the values that I think are important. So if I view fair taxation, investment in public schools, so all kids can have good access to education. Those values that I have are informed by my religious worldview, how I view the world. So I don't think we should ever make the case of, well, your religious values should not influence your politics at all. How could they not? Because if religion constitutes our value system of how we engage the world, it embraces whatever is of our utmost concern. I mean, even Raphael Warnock, when he was running for the governor against Herschel Walker in Georgia, or running for US Senate, he made this a comment to saying, I think he said something along the lines of, when we vote, it's like our offering our prayer. And I think that's kind of a beautiful notion, that when we vote, it is kind of like a prayer. This is our hope for our society. This is our hope for the world. But those of us who come from a Christian perspective, my values are also informed by pluralism. Like, I want to be a part of a diverse society, that's a good thing. I want to respect my neighbor. I don't want to assume that my perspective is the only perspective and should be enforced on everybody else. But I will participate with my one vote in the democratic process, and I can vote my values. And I think embracing democracy as well is part of my core values. And I think many religious folks would also embrace democracy as a value.
Well, yeah, thank you for this beautiful message. I have never thought about that, like the vote is like a prayer. And maybe maybe I'm from the Buddhism, because our perspective on religion is like to reduce our attachment, like to reduce our expectation. So like, it's like to escape from the social society, something that way. So it's like totally different perspective. And that's why I'm really amazed, because in our country, we believe religion should be segregated from the politic. Religious leaders in Buddhism should be focusing on like meditating or residing or preaching, but not in politics. Because if they involve in politics, the politics can be out of control, because like such as in the equality of other religions, how will we handle something that way?
And you raise a kind of a widespread universal question about that religious adherents around the world wrestle with, even with Christians, because there are many Christians who say, I don't want to get involved in politics. I just want to be involved in supporting my church community. And that's certainly like an Anabaptist way of seeing the world. But there are many perspectives. Majid, did you have a closing remark?
No, I was waving at someone.
Okay. Well, this has been a very rich conversation. I wish we had a little more time, but we really do need to wrap up at this time. We will post this recorded video online, and we can share that with others who joined us. But I really do appreciate you all being involved, and it seems like this resonated with most of us. So thank you for our SUSE participants and also our special guests and board members. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day or evening.